Well, hello everybody. My name's Daniel Hourigan. I'm the head of effects at CG Spectrum, and as well, I'm a film and visual effects artist for for film and television. Um, and today I'm going to be working on a cool kind of project. I previously worked with KitBash assets in the past. You might have seen the market stream that I did, where I sort of destroyed the market assets. But in this time, KitBash is having a sale called Cyber Month, which basically they have 50% off their entire website for a whole month, which is awesome. But to celebrate, they've given me a pack, the Treasure Island pack, to do some cool destruction with. So I'm super excited to do that. And this is one of the packs that I've sort of had my eye on for a long time, because I think it's super cool, and there's a pirate ship in it as well, which I'm probably going to work with today. But there's a whole lot of really cool assets. So let's jump in and have a look. Sorry about the audio issues. There's always something going on. So this is the website. If you're not familiar with KitBash, this is KitBash3D.com, and as you can see, they're having a sale. The kit that I have got here, let's go to the kits page. The kit that I'm using is this one, Treasure Island. And you can see it's full of all sorts of cool stuff. I really like this asset. This is cool. I was having a look at that earlier. And the pirate ship is just great. Yeah, lots of potential. But even some of these set pieces, we could make a full scene with this stuff. So let's have a look at the kit. I've just brought it into Houdini. The cool thing, just to go back to the website, the cool thing with KitBash is you can download in the format that you want to work in. So I've gone for the Houdini format. The native renderer means that it's just going to be set up for Mantra. So this is the file that you get with it. When you open it, it's kind of just the native file, and then all the geos in here and the textures. And then inside of here are a whole bunch of loaders. So within here are all the assets that we can have a look at, and you can go in and take a good look. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. Lots of people joined. Rizwan, no, I haven't had a chance to look at your video, sorry. Been so busy the last couple of weeks. Hey Ash, how are you going? Good night. Good day. Good morning for me. So here's the ship. Looks pretty cool. It looks like there's some normal display issues here, so I'm just going to flick it over to flat shaded so we can see. And I think this looks super cool. There's lots of individual pieces, which looks good. Whenever I'm assessing a model for... Oh, looks like my camera froze. Hopefully you guys can still hear me. Whenever I'm assessing a model for destruction, it's important to have individual pieces. You want separated pieces. Looks like I've managed to get my camera back. So when I see a model like this, I'm like, cool, it's already sort of prepared and ready for me to do something with. And that's great, because quite often you don't get that. You have to do quite a bit of prep. And there's probably prep that we need to do still on something like this, but this is a really good start. To see those individual planks means that maybe it'll just work, which is, that'd be amazing. But take a look at some of these models. They're so cool. Like, doing some destruction on something like this would be amazing. So much fun. And again, individual planks. So I might have a bit of a play with some of those as well, just to see kind of, how they perform. I got to remember to have my chat window up. So let's have a look at this one. I love this. This is cool. It reminds me of a job I did when I was first starting out in 3D. I used to do game trailers, and I did this one for a game called like Fury or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was a skeleton cage and some fire or something, and it just reminds me of that very cool medieval looking thing. So tons of cool stuff here. Could have hours of fun. Hey Axel, how's it going? Alright, so I kind of already decided that I was gonna play around with doing a ship today, but I think if we, if we have time, we might have a look at some of the other assets, and this will probably take me more than a single stream, so you guys can, you guys can come back and join me another time to, to see what else we could do with this stuff. Yeah, that's right, Alan, and it's funny you say that, because here I have a couple of GIFs, just of reference, of the Kraken destroying that ship in Pirates of the Caribbean, because that's exactly what I think of too when I, when I see a pirate ship and I want to destroy it. I want to kind of, I want to do stuff like this. So I think, I think doing something like this, maybe even just in a simpler fashion, because, as you guys know, I'm restricted by time, so I have to kind of keep it simple. But, if we do it over a couple of streams, I think we could get something pretty cool. I'm not going to focus on the water. For starters, that's kind of, I guess, secondary element, and we can talk about, how we might do that later. I've done lots of flip stuff. I don't want to bore you guys with lots more flip. So let's do some cool destruction. We've got the sails here, We could do vellum simulations for the sails, even the wires. We could look at vellum or even the wire solver to do those. We're not seeing a lot of destruction in this shot. There is a whole sequence where the Kraken kind of destroys the ship in one of the movies, which is cool to take a look at. But it's much more sort of close up on the ship, seeing it destroyed. Now, I don't have a octopus model, but I was thinking I might make a procedural tentacle to do the destruction. But first things first, what I'm going to do is just isolate this ship, because at the moment everything is kind of here. It's all together in one pack. If you have a look in the main geometry container that comes in the file, you can see all these different objects, and you'll see I've already marked one green. That's the ship. But in order to easily find that, you can just hit the / button to get find node, and then if I just start typing ship, you can see then I can click on that result and it takes me to that node. So instead of going through each one trying to look for it, use the find function to sort through that easily. And what you'll notice is that it's a file node, and the ship is actually at world 0 to begin with, and then they offset it into that position for the layout. But we actually just want it at world 0, so I'm just going to put a null here and say out pirate ship, and then just turn off that geometry container, and let's put a new one down. We'll call this one ship setup. Object merge, out pirate ship. Okay, cool. So now we've isolated that. Let's see what we have to work with here, because quite often, with assets that have been modeled properly, you'll get a bunch of groups, material paths, things that we can use to separate out the model. And, if you guys saw the last stream I did on working with these assets, we can split this stuff up using paths, using name attributes, using the groups. So, there's lots here. You can see, see all these groups here that I can utilize. Let's have a look at the shop material paths as well, because we can see that we can potentially split things up based on what sort of material they have. So we've got wood. I can see bones there. Let's see what else we've got. So we've got lots of different types of wood, painted, beams. We've got steel, lots of steel, sail, ropes, and bones. So let's just start breaking it up. And we'll just middle click, make sure we're working with polygons. It's not packed or anything, so that's a good start. Let's split this up now. So we can, these are the groups that show up, but what I could also do is at shop underscore material path equals, and then I could do something like wood. So if you look at the actual path, it is very long and it contains many characters. It's a string. It's a string data type. A string is a bunch of characters or words. But I want to isolate this wood here. So in order to do that, I use like a wildcard function. So star wood star. And that should isolate all the things that have wood in their path. And there we go. So what it's done is split out everything that is wood onto one side of the split, and on the other side is everything else. Ash says, what are your thoughts on Houdini 19? Oh, look, it's okay. You know, I'm not kind of, I haven't delved into it like 100%. So far I'm not, you know, blown away by updates or anything. There are some cool, you know, there are certainly some cool things. I really do not like the new file cache node, and I find it a little bit buggy. So I find myself reverting, which is often something that I'll do when a new version comes out, because it sort of messes up my workflow and slows me down. So for a little while, I end up switching back to the old nodes, which is probably not. I don't know. It's good. It's good to keep updating with the software, but if it slows me down too much, like I was doing a little freelance job this past week, and it, you know, I was trying to get stuff out really quickly, and I found this node just slowing me down, and kind of it was throwing errors when I was hitting save and doing all sorts of weird stuff. So I was like, you know what, I don't have time for this. I'm just gonna revert. So what I did was I enabled, if you go to assets, you can turn on the asset definition toolbar. So you can have it show always, show when needed. And that gives you this. And this is the asset definition of the file cache, for instance. And what I did was I just changed it back to file cache. And now you can see that that's the old file cache from 18.5. And, you know, that works. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles of the other one. But I have a workflow that works well when using that. And yeah, I don't know, for some reason this one I need to report it to side effects, because when I started using this and using the versioning stuff within this file cache, it started to break when I hit save. It would throw a Python error. So I don't know what's up with that, but yeah, there are little things like that that, you know, kind of annoy me when switching to new versions. But yeah, look, you know, it seems good. There's a lot of new kind of cool tools in it, but I haven't, as I said, I haven't had a chance to kind of fully explore it and dive into, you know, all the cool things. I really like some of the labs tools, like the labs polyslice tool. I ended up using for some things, which is pretty cool. We can explore that, you know, some other time. So here we go. Here's our wood. Here's everything else. So let's split up everything else first. We'll put another split down, and let's do the same thing. We'll copy, and this is the boring part, I'm sorry, but it has to be, you know, it has to be done. Sales, and let's see if we can get that one going. Geometry spreadsheet, sales. It's just sale, that's why it's not coming up. Alright, so there we go, sale. So, you know, I could send all those into Vellum. It may be a bit kind of problematic doing something like that in Vellum because it is already scrunched up. But, you know, maybe you don't do those ones. Maybe you do these ones in Vellum, or I don't know. Not sure exactly. And then let's have a look. So, you know, I usually just put nulls either side like this, and then there we've got ropes, and I can see a whole bunch of cannons there as well. So I reckon we've probably got the steel material in there for the cannons. You know, there's no cannon material necessarily, but they're metal, so it makes sense that they would have the steel material. There we go. There we go. So all those things are steel. And, you know, we don't necessarily need to split them up further than that. Just depends what we want to do in terms of, you know, the simulation. Hey, Rizwan, my email, if you want to send me stuff, is... I was about to write it in a notepad, but I'll just put it in the chat. There you go. Alright, so let's see what we've got. We've got sales over here, so I'm just going to call this one sales. And, you know, as I talked about on the last time I did this stuff with the, you know, asset, it's important to kind of do this, you know, very clean, you know, well-labeled workflow, because it just makes, you know, processing all this stuff so much easier. So that one doesn't really need a null now. Get rid of that one. And then this one can be wood, all wood. But then we could split this one down further as well. So if we have a look within this one, we've got wood tropic, wood beam. Let's see what else we've got. Wood timbers, wood painted, wood paint dark, wood hull, and mast I saw there. So yeah, those are good ones to kind of utilize. And of course we could use the groups as well. You'll see some of these groups are starting to be empty now. You can see all those zeros. So that means that, you know, that object is no longer there. We split it off to the other side. So those groups can be gotten rid of. Let's chuck a group delete down and just turn on delete unused groups. And then we should see that those ones are gone, and we can see what we have to work with now a little clearer. So let's do mast. We should get the masts. There we go. So we'll just put a null down for that. And let's see what's on the other side. And we had a hull as well. So let's do hull. There we go. So that's cool. And then, so that null doesn't really need to be there anymore. Let's just get rid of that. It's going to be hull. And let's see what's left. Ah, cool. So that's all the kind of interior stuff, as well as bits of cannon and these big beams. Presumably those, when I do beams in here, that will be, I've got to get the, maybe it's beam. Hey, there we go. Interesting, it's not what I was expecting for beams. Sometimes you get the right thing, sometimes you don't. Let's see what these are. Sometimes, so another way to figure out, you know, I want to get these kind of long parts of the ship. I mean, I could just manually select them, but to do it kind of procedurally and make sure that it's by material, I can turn on now only show selected and see what material they have on them. So they've got wood paint dark on them. So then I can just, you know, perhaps I could do dark and get whatever's in that. And it looks like there's many things in the dark one. So we could do paint dark, maybe wood paint dark. Oh, I guess there's lots of things that have wood paint dark, so that doesn't totally work. Let's have a look at the group that these are in as well. So if you come across, these are all the groups here that show up as a kind of attribute, and you can see, well, they're in the wood paint dark group as well. So splitting that up, yeah. Oh, there's another group here. Let's see, ship a hull as well. Maybe they don't. Maybe they haven't isolated those down. So we might just have to manually select those. The reason I want to isolate these ones is because they're super long, so they need to be broken. They need to be broken up. So let's delete those. And we can see a bit of an issue here for RBD destruction, and that's that these are open-faced objects. So we're going to need to rectify that as well. And let's have a look at these. So that's all one connected piece of geometry. Yeah, Marcus, absolutely. You could do a measure on this stuff as well. So yeah, you could do the whole boat from the top based on that. I find splitting it up into the material selections first is a good way just to figure out what what is what material so that I can do different fracture methods. But absolutely, a measure and, you know, then splitting based on the size of the area of each piece is a completely valid way of doing it too. And I might still utilize that. So let's have a look at these. I mean, we could just try doing a polyfill on these, but chances are that it's not going to do it perfectly, although that actually did do it pretty well. So there we go. We're lucky. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but that looks pretty good. So cool. Let's call this like long. Any boat builders out there know what these are called? I'm just going to call them long hull beams. And then what have we got over here? And also, we want to make sure, because I've done a blast here, which has left out some things. Those are now missing. So what I should probably do is turn that into a split and put those primitive selections into this split so that I retain the other stuff on the other side here, which is everything else. So there we go. Alright, so we've got a ton of stuff that we need to work with. Let's take a look at the hull, because this looks like it's pretty well made out of lots of little pieces. There's some long pieces. And this is potentially where we could use the measure. But let's take a look at this. So I'm just going to put down a rigid body. Ibd Solver. You work in feet and inches. Well, that's good, Rizwan. Houdini traditionally is in meters, so each one of these units is, you know, this is 10 meters that we're working in. You can always change that stuff if you want, but feet and inches does not make sense to me because I don't use the imperial system. Let's use ground plane, so we'll turn that on and scroll that down just below. What I'm doing here is just a test, so I'm going to hit save before I do that. I just want to see this thing fall down and break into a million pieces. And it does, which is super cool. You know, it's great when a model does that. Sometimes you'll get models, especially, you know, free models or cheaper models, where that would be modeled just as a single, you know, kind of piece. And maybe it's got a texture of wood on it and not individual planks. So it makes it much harder to kind of, you know, it means that you have to then fracture it and try and work out a way to make it look like individual planks. But that's super cool. So you can kind of do this. I mean, we could do this all the way back up here, even, you know, at any point we could do that and see, you know, see what it does. You can see here, well, I'm middle clicking on the Ibd Solver. Inside of here, it's assigning a name attribute so that it can work with bullet. And you can see there are 7,627 unique pieces. And there's some things in here that are not going to solve well, like the wires, you know, because it's going to treat them as rigid bodies. And it may just kind of explode. But we'll see what happens. It's just going to kind of fall down. And this is always a good test to do when you first get the model, you know. This might be the first thing that I do, just to see what happens and how much I need to actually do to the ship. You will see the really large parts kind of do some wacky things, so it kind of shows up those areas that will need a lot of work in terms of adding fractures or, you know, dividing up into smaller pieces. But as you can see, like, it looks pretty good, you know. It looks like a ship falling apart. But you can see these big beams running through here, creating a bit of a collision. So, pretty cool. Let's keep going. So we've got the masts. Now here's where we could use the measure. So I'm going to add the measure sop. That's going to generate me an area. I can do per element, and that's going to do it based on each polygon. So if we have a look, turn off only show selected. Actually, it's going to do it based on connectivity per element. Sorry, my mistake. So you can see that all these ones have the same area. You can do it per piece as well. So if you had name attribute on these things, you could do it per name. But this looks fine. And then what we can do is put a split down and split based on that area. So I could say at area greater than 10, see what shows up. It's a primitive attribute at the moment. So flick it over to primitives and then just play with your area value until you get what you want showing up. So you can see I've actually gotten rid of all the small pieces that were there, and I'm just left with these larger pieces of mask. So yeah, you can put that, as you put that up, it loses those smaller ones. And it's weird, sometimes you will get, you know, something like this staying in there, which shouldn't really, you know, I don't know why that one's area, unless it's just not calculating it properly, that one. We can select it, have a look, see what area it's getting. You can see it's getting a total, maybe it's because, yeah, because of the connectivity thing. I don't know if that affects some of these values here. But yeah, you can see that one's getting 1.55, even though it is a much smaller object. Let's try this instead. We'll do assemble to create a name. We'll call this mast. And we'll do the measure per piece based on name. And then we'll try that and see if that gives us any one. Now we're getting different area values. So yeah, I think perhaps I was right about that, doing it per face. It seemed weird that they were all very similar values, but maybe they were just the same size polygons. Oops. And now you can see we have much larger values. So there we go. So, you know, getting just greater than 3 seems to get rid of greater than 4 maybe. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now what we can do is fracture those up. So, you know, in fact, I'm going to be doing this a lot. So let's make this into a little tool that I can copy around. So what am I going to do? Actually, instead of doing assemble, I might do a connectivity node, because that will sort of, this one has a, you know, very sort of specific thing in it, masts. Whereas if I just use connectivity and calculate class, I'm going to do it as a primitive attribute so that I can feed it in here per element, per piece class. That should still work. Yep. Then I don't have to then specify a name for each one. I'll just leave it as class on each one and I can do the naming later. Let's wrap this up into a subnet, and I'm going to call this measure and split. And I'm going to put down 2 output nodes. So output 0 and output 1. And then you'll see my subnet now has 2 outputs. So from that I can put my nulls to view each output. And now I've got some controls that I want to add, or just one really. I just want to add this value to the top here. So what I'm going to do is edit parameter interface and add a float value to this. And I'm going to hide these inputs. So just select them, tick on invisible, hit apply, accept. And now you can see I have a little float here. I left the label as default. So let's change this to area split. And I guess I'll just paste that in there. Area split, apply, accept. Now copy this parameter and paste it here. So greater than, paste relative reference. So it's going to be greater than the value that's in the area split channel. And now you can see that I can change this and it's splitting them off. So there we go. If I look at that. Hey, look at that. So now I can copy this around and, you know, it's a nice little simple tool for me to use. Temperature is good, Rizwan. Right in this room right now it's 19 degrees, so it's probably about the same outside. It's getting sunny and warm, which is great. It's almost summer here. So yeah, let's call this masts large, and let's do some fracturing on this stuff. So what are we going to do? I guess one thing that we could do, and I'm probably just going to do this manually, is to select the masts, the tall ones, and I'll probably break those up first. So I'll just delete those, delete non-selected, and then I'm just going to do a Voronoi fracture on these. You know, I'm going to keep this simple. I don't like using the material fraction node, even though it does do a pretty nice job on doing wood. It's incredibly slow, and I just can't stand waiting. So I'm going to do my little wood fracture trick, which is to squash the geometry. So I'm going to do it based on the centroid. I've got a little preset here for centroid, which just puts $CX, $CY, and $CZ in the pivot translate. And then when I squash these, they'll squash around their centers. So I'm going to do that, scatter, Voronoi fracture on this squash geometry, and you can see there we got that kind of stuff happening. It's a little bit of a problem here, which makes me think that these are not capped. Yep. Let's do a polyfill first. There we go. Fracture. That's fixed. And then we do the inverse scale here. So I'm just going to copy this transform actually. And I'm just going to copy this parameter and paste it here, paste relative reference, and then scroll down and tick on invert, and it scales it back up to the original scale. So it's just doing the inverse scale of whatever this value is. It's doing the opposite, and what you end up with is the thing back at the original position. But what that does is it stretches out all of those Voronoi shapes to become like splinters, kind of fragments, long fragments. And the more you squash it, the longer those fragments get. So you can see, if I go right down, you can see they get super long. And there's some kind of cool little tiny ones here, which, yeah, sometimes it's kind of not great to have super tiny ones. Actually, what I have done here is use the scatter node, which isn't amazing when you're doing wood fractures, because it puts all the fracture points on the surface. And what you end up with, if you have a look at the exploded view, yeah, it's not too bad when you have like I guess a sparse amount of points. But when you have more, what you end up with is only fractures on the surface, and they kind of extrude inwards to the center, so they feel a bit chunky. But if you instead use a points from volume, which distributes points through the middle, all the way through, you get kind of even distribution of splinters all the way through the wood, which, you know, makes sense when you're going to fracture those things. So let's try that instead. Scale that back up, exploded view, and you can see it's very ordered at the moment, but you can see that even distribution of kind of sizes through. But then what we need to do is turn on the jitter, so it's a bit more random. There we go. So that just gives a better result overall. You can actually combine the two, so you get surface and interior, you know. It just depends what you're going for. And you can see, as I play with the scale, those splinters get smaller as I put that closer to 1, or as I go closer to 0, they get longer. Now, it becomes a little bit more tricky, so that's why I split the verticals off, so I can scale in the same direction for all. And then I would need to also do the opposite of that, and then isolate these ones. So all the horizontals. The diagonals are a little bit trickier to deal with because they're not easily scaled in their, you know, in one particular axis. So we'll have to come up with something for that. Let's do transform, points from volume. They're pretty small, these ones, so let's just make sure that the points from volume is actually doing something. Oh, and you know what? This is doing the wrong axes now. So we want to scale these down along Z. There we go. Doesn't look like we need to polyfill these ones. Do our points from volume. We might need to take the separation down. Fracture. And scale. Copy. Whoops. Just do that belly. Copy. Paste relative reference. And invert. Okay, so we'll check that one. So there we go. You know, and again, you can just kind of adjust that to make them look good. All right. So we got now those two, the verticals and the horizontals. Let's take a look at how we could potentially do those diagonal ones. I'd be inclined just to kind of not worry about them because it is kind of a hassle to work with them. But let's see. So we got blast here and then another blast here. If we do the opposite of that, we should get those ones. And then I probably, because they're at different angles, I'm going to work on one at a time. So I'll work on this first one first. And perhaps what we can do is a transform and then try and rotate it to be, you know, vertical or horizontal. I mean, that actually 30 degrees looks amazingly pretty good. It's got end cap holes. I mean, it has holes on the end caps, so let's put a polyfill. There we go. I'll take this setup and paste it there. We'll scale now along the x-axis, 0.05. And we've got the wrong channel reference here, so let's just fix that. Copy parameter, paste relative reference. Okay, and then we need to invert the rotation. Aha! Great success. So what we should have, it may be slightly off because of the way the centroid kind of changes things. You can see it's slightly moved. So actually what we should do, because yeah, the reason is I think all the way back up here we've calculated the centroid of the object. But then we've done some stuff to it, and here we're recalculating the centroid. You can see the centroid moves between these two nodes. So the centroid has changed a little bit. What we should do is actually just break this expression. So calculate the centroid, get it, delete it, copy this value, and then don't use $CX down here, but paste that same value in there, and then you saw it shift a little bit. If we then compare the two, they're now identical and not moving. So you always have to be careful when you're dynamically calculating the centroid of something, because it can change, you know, especially if the object has moved slightly or you've done something to it. So there we go, a little bit tedious, and you could probably come up with some sort of workflow to do that en masse. But yeah, you know, that works. And then the fractures are running the correct way along that wood. So we can merge that with our other stuff. And I'm just going to ignore the other one for now, just because, you know, it's tedious, time consuming. And I want to kind of get going with this destruction. I'm going to ignore the small bits there. And we've got this, which is working pretty well, although this giant piece here is a little bit kind of too large, and let's check out these ones. I think these are okay. But this big kind of hunk of wood here, I mean, maybe it's fine, maybe it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be dropping this on a ground plane. You know, it's going to be under the water, and that section of the wood is probably going to be under the water. So maybe I just won't worry about that. Let's start trying to put everything back together and see kind of what we've got. The long hole beams. So we need to deal with those. And I think probably what we can do here is we'll just squash those all at once. Down, looks like they're running down the x-axis. So let's just squash those down x. 0.05, there we go. And do the Voronoi fracture and scale back. Just have to watch, you know, how many points from volume you're actually putting in there. It might be too much for that scale. And then, gotta make sure we get our right axes. Copy. Paste relative reference. Hey, there we go. Alright, so let's see how many points we're getting. Oh, only 180. So, you know, the number of points kind of dictates how many fractures you're going to get. So, if I have a look at the name attribute that's being output, 579 unique pieces now. So, it's not really that many. But as you start to put all this stuff together, it does add up to a significant amount of pieces. Okay, so all these small bits, again, not going to worry about them too much. This stuff looks pretty good. You know, there's a few things in here that could be fractured up, so let's use our measure tool to isolate the various things. So, well, there we go. There's all the long bits, and we can take that down to potentially get more or less. And yeah, I mean, there's probably some things in there that I don't really need to split up, but maybe I'll try and get it as low as I can. 6.5. That looks like 6. I definitely want to fracture that one. And what could we do? We've got some horizontal things in here as well as some verticals. So in order to just do that, I'm just going to do that manually because it will take me too long to sort of work out a system for those. And it's really not worth it. Where I can just do that, and then I've kind of isolated all the horizontal things. This one's a bit of a compound thing, so that sort of requires slightly different processing, but if I isolate those, oops, and then again I can do this kind of en masse thing. And really I should wrap this up into a tool just the same way as I did the measure, because that will you know, that will kind of do the same thing, where, you know, maybe all I promote is the point separation, and that's all I need. So there we go, fractured. Give these a few more points. How's everybody doing out there? Everyone's very quiet. I'm hoping that my chat window is still working. You can see this one here, the way that scale fracturing is going is, you know, it doesn't do a good job on this stuff here. So potentially that object, you know, we might just, maybe these two objects will kind of isolate into a separate system where we can process those differently. Hey Axel, good. Thank you for confirming my chat is still working. You're here, great. Woo. Sorry the setup part takes so long, but it is important, you know, it's boring, but it is necessary. So the blast I need in there, delete non-selected, that should give me that. Okay, so now I'll do my fracture. This one as well kind of isn't getting great. Yeah, anyone been working on anything interesting? Love to hear about what you guys are doing, and if anyone decides to do something like this, I'd love to see, you know, what you guys come up with. I saw a few people had tried out the last one I did, and various other projects that I've kind of been working on, and I love seeing what you guys come up with. So please share it if you're working on anything cool. So what are we doing here? This should be our other isolated bits. What I'm going to do with these is actually split them up to be kind of individual planks. So what I'm going to do is select these ones like that. And just make sure I haven't got any weird sort of selections. And maybe I'll also do this one at the same time. And I just want to make sure that I get a nice clean edge. Same thing on this side. Alrighty, delete. So what I end up with when I do that is, you know, horizontals and, I don't know, they're not verticals, but yeah, you know what I mean. So polyfill now to cap those holes on each side. And then we can do the scale thing for each one of these. Destroying trees, that sounds cool, Marcus. You're doing that in Houdini, I'm hoping. That's cool. What sort of system did you use to do that? So got to scale this down Z. I should probably just copy the whole channel rather than just the individual ones. That will save me having to redo this every time. There we go. And then just duplicate that. Change the axes. You can see those ones scale a little weirdly, but it should still be better. You know, it's not perfect. You can see how those run kind of. Really, we should probably do the rotation thing on those, but whatever. It's okay. It'll be fine. This is a minor part in the whole scheme of things. We'll merge everything back together. And I reckon we've probably got enough to sort of test with now. I might just ignore the other stuff so that we can dive into getting, you know, a decent fracture going. Okay, so we need something. We're missing this part. Let's have a look. So those, actually, we probably should fracture. Yeah, look, the material fracture it can give good results for wood, and you know, the system that they're using is like a Boolean cutting system, which, you know, has its own issues from time to time, but it does generate some cool looks. But yeah, I just can't handle the speed of that thing. It just, certainly when I'm look deving something like this, you know, where I'm just trying to figure out and produce a setup that gives me a certain look, you know, I just can't justify that time. But it might be something that once I've decided on the look, then I go back to, and I kind of go, well, actually, you know, I need to step up these fractures now, and I need them to look really good, so I need to go and kind of resolve that. But Voronoi is just so fast, I just can't. Yeah, just, I don't know, painful that one. Alright, so it looks like we're missing all of this stuff from this output. Here we go. So let's go down here. Got a behemoth of a network now. So I reckon that is probably going to be fine. You know, it's all just going to fall apart. And where's our hull? Here it is. Nope. Nope. Yeah, this one. Okay, let's merge that one in. Alright, so it looks like we've got a pretty good ship now. We're missing, you know, some stuff, but this is what we need to kind of get going and start building this effect. And then we can add the other stuff in. I don't know what is this little piece. See if we can find it. Maybe it's on the hull. Nope. Where are you coming from, little guy? Maybe over here. It's part of something. Let's have a look right at the top. It's like a little pulley or something. I'm just going to ditch that. In fact, what I'll do is put another measure node on here and just get rid of all the really tiny things. So we'll just take that down until all the really tiny things go away. Maybe that's still there. 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.3. What's the main difference between destruction workflow on SOP level versus DOP? I mean the old way versus the new one. Oh yeah, so you're talking about doing, like, using, I'm gonna get your name wrong, Amin? By using the SOP based one here, as opposed to doing it in .NET. To be honest, there's, you know, they're the same thing. This is just a tool that they've built which promotes all of the sort of, you know, most common and useful things to the top level. Just like I, you know, created my little tool here, they've made a little tool by promoting all of the things that you might need to do a very simple .NET. But when you want to do something more complex, and probably what I'm going to do is do it properly in a .NET work, because this one, you know, whilst it's good for simple stuff, it can be a little challenging to do really complex stuff, especially when you have lots of different constraint networks, and yeah, it just, and you want to do like really complex activation and SOP solver based stuff. It just becomes a little bit harder to deal with. Not impossible, but just slightly more challenging to do custom stuff. So yeah, look, it's really quite good, and I use it all the time, especially for, you know, for testing things, and even for, you know, doing reasonably simple stuff. But it can handle, you know, complexity. It can handle constraints. It's just, I've found when I want to start to get into the real kind of minutiae of controlling stuff, then it starts to be like I need to open it up and actually get into the .NET work. So I think, yeah, it's great until you get to that point where you're like, actually, now I need to go and do it in the .NET work properly and make it easier for myself. But I think it's really good. You know, I've done lots of destruction with this thing now, and I love all the SOP-based tools that they've got in there. But they are just wrapped up versions of the .NET work. So, you know, inside all of these tools is the .NET with the setup. So it, you know, it is the same thing. It's just the way that they have presented it is nice and easy to kind of get into. So this is looking cool. You know, you can see the mask there is looking really nice. Obviously, it's all just falling apart as a pile of matchsticks at the moment. And you can see that jumbo piece there acting as a really big collider. So, you know, it's not the best, but it's okay. Let's start doing this properly. So I'm going to just put this one to one side. You notice I put an assemble down there. I'm recalculating the name attribute at this point, because what I noticed when I didn't do that is that some of the pieces didn't come in. When you do a Voronoi fracture, it creates a name attribute for you, and it, you know, it just puts this piece name by default. I've got all these Voronoi fractures all set to the default of creating a name called piece. So I've got conflicting names. I've got, you know, lots of objects that have the same name, piece 0, piece 1, piece, you know, whatever. So you need to give them unique names. You can do that just by putting an assembled right at the end. Or if you wanted to maintain some sort of grouping on these things, you could put an assemble down at each point and give it a specific name. So mast, for example. And, well, these are all masts. So maybe at this point, I'd put the mast there, like that. So these are all the masts. Now they have their own name. And, you know, if we come up here, we can, you know, call this one like long beams. And this can be useful when you sort of bring this stuff out of DOPs, because it allows you to then split up based on the name attribute that you've created as well. So I'm going to call this one hull. And let's see what else we've got here. So we're merging all these ones together. And then we've got this one as well. Might merge that here with these so that I can just put a name on here. And we'll just call this one like, I don't know, interior something. It's not exactly, but interior bits. So then we should have a name on everything now that is unique for each kind of section. Then we don't need this one. And if we run this again just to check, it should just do the same thing. Oh, I missed that. Alan, you said you're doing a personal piece centering around the sun god Ra and his use as a power source. That's cool. That sounds great, Alan. What are you doing any kind of effects with that, or it sounds really interesting? Alright, so let's start setting this up properly, and then we'll start building constraints as well, which is, you know, it's going to transform this from being a pile of matchsticks into something that looks really cool. Then we'll start looking at, you know, how we can bring in, you know, octopus or a tentacle or something. I'll start just by doing something simple, and then we can work that up. So, .NET. I'm going to create a rigid body solver, which is a bullet solver, but it has the ability to do both. There's a switch inside, but it has these extra inputs which are useful for doing custom sort of activation and stuff like that, all the stuff that I was talking about. So let's now put a packed object in, Ibd packed object, and I need here, I'm going to use this assemble, but I'm not going to name them here because I've already done that. I'm just going to use it to pack them. Now we can see we've got 6,706 packed objects. And I've plugged that into the first input, so I can actually just choose first context. There we go. Gravity. Ground plane. And now we have exactly what we had in the SOP-based one. So just a very simple scene with the object, the ground plane, and gravity. And we should get, if I drop that down, hit save before you simulate. Save before sim. Should get a t-shirt that says that. And we should get, you know, a similar kind of result. And it'll crash eventually. One of the limitations I've found with the SOP-based Ibd Solver is the ability to change or manipulate the collision stuff. So that's one reason why I've often dove in here, is if I want to play around with the collision representation of the objects or the collision objects, I find that that's a bit fiddly in the SOP-based one, whereas in this one it's very easy. And the visualization in the SOP-based one seems slightly broken or something. It might be fixed in 19, I don't know. But this one I can just go to show guide geometry and then it'll show me, you know, that very quickly. And I can see, you know, these are convex hulls, so they're doing a kind of shrink wrapping thing over anything that's kind of has concavity. It's probably not going to be a problem with this, but it's just something, you know, to be aware of that is happening. It's the most efficient kind of shape to do that. You can also tick on create convex hull per set of connected primitives. That can sometimes help, but it looks like that's what we're going to get for this one. Turn that off. It's very slow to display. Alright, it's constraint time. Let's start making constraints. So the first one that I'm going to do is just off everything. I'm going to put the connect adjacent pieces down. And these all have name attributes already, which is what this uses. And I'm going to do pieces from surface points. And this is going to give me a glue network. Small real-time effects, I'd say. It's a ship that utilizes the former god as the engine's power source. Oh, cool. That sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing the result. So the way that this looks is basically it's creating a primitive from the centroid of each differently named piece to the other within, you know, this radius. You've got a maximum number of search points, so, you know, if you change the radius, you'll get less connections. This tool is great for, you know, creating kind of networking type effects as well. I did a job recently where I used this just to create those kind of connections between objects. It's really cool. But basically, you know, when we just leave it on the defaults, it looks fine. This is what a good glue network looks like, where you've got connections between each piece. And this is a good thing, you know. You're talking about differences between, you know, the new rigid body tools and the old rigid body tools. There's this constraint properties node, which is quite handy. And basically what you do is you plug in your named geometry into it, and then the constraint geometry that you've created into the pink input, and it will set up the constraint type, you know, the attributes basically that are needed for constraints. I'm in the habit of doing this in a wrangle, which you know, I find quite easy, but it does save you time doing that constraint properties node. The only thing I don't like about it is I don't really like setting strength as an attribute on my constraints. I prefer just doing that in DOPS. But yeah, you know, so it's up to you. I'm going to do it my old-fashioned way that I know. So there are two attributes that are required for constraints to work. Constraint type, and there's a few different types. There's position, rotation. I usually just put all for both position and rotation. And then the name is the next thing. So constraint underscore name equals whatever you like. Let's just call this glue. And it's a primitive attribute. It has to be on primitives because these are primitive shapes. And then just create a null. No, you don't need to. You can use this. Very handy. I mean, you can always delete these glue attributes as well if you wanted to. You'll see if we turn this on, all it's doing is creating these primitive attributes. So hide. We have to look at the pink output. So put a null down there and view that, and you can see constraint name. It actually doesn't create a constraint type, so maybe that's not totally necessary, or maybe it's only necessary if you want to specify what degree of, you know, rotation it has. Maybe only that's needed for hard, and you can see here constraint type there. So maybe glue doesn't need it at all. You know, it's good to, you know, use these nodes to learn. But I'll leave it there. You know, it doesn't hurt to have it there. And I'm going to call this out glue on this null, and I can reference it in here. So we're going to create a constraint network. Oops. And then a glue constraint relationship. And this is where the name comes into it. You put it here. So whatever name you choose, it doesn't have to be glue. It could just be called, you know, bananas. It just has to match. That's all that's important there. And here is where we feed the path to that null that I created. So go and find it, out glue. And there it is. If it doesn't show up, it's not working. So, you know, if the guide is on by default, if you don't see it, there's a problem. It's often a problem with the name attribute, but it could also be that you got that name wrong and it's not showing up. Now here's where you can set the strength in here. I find this easier when I'm just look deving stuff to just control it here. It's in the simulation. I don't have to jump out every time I want to change the glue. Let's, instead of using gravity to break this thing, because that's a bit of a slow wait, let's create a, you know, a kind of something to smash this stuff. I'm thinking I might start looking at creating my tentacle. I'm just going to make this very simple to start with, and then, you know, see what I can do from here. Let's use the polywire to generate thickness on this, and polywire can be overridden by an attribute to drive the width of the wire. So what I'm going to do is put a resample down on this line to give it more points. But also, I'm going to use the curve U attribute. So it gives me an attribute on this line which runs from 0 to 1 at the end of the line. What that enables me to do is to generate a width attribute along the length. So I'm going to bind curve U in here. Oops, curve U. Float, and then I'm going to bind export width. And it's a float. This is a spline ramp. And then I'm also probably going to put this into a fit so that I can control the output. So, you know, maybe I don't want it going from 0 to 1. Maybe I want it going from 0 to 0.1, for example. And then in here, I'm going to put at width. And when I start playing with my ramp, hey, look at that. So, yeah, you know, this is a simple way of creating a kind of interesting tapering shape. It did just occur to me that, you know, there's potentially another way to do this, which might give a more organic feeling. And that could be... Hey, cool. Thank you. I'm not gonna attempt your name because I don't want to offend you. But thank you for that. It means a lot, and I hope you guys do get, you know, stuff out of this. I like sharing these setups with you and, you know, teaching you guys about all this stuff. The other method that I thought might be interesting is to use, instead of setting width, I'll also set p-scale. So that's another attribute that you could use to set the width. If I set p-scale and then do a VDB from particles, it will dynamically or automatically take the p-scale value that's set here, and we can, you know, override it or multiply it using this. And this will turn it into a volume, so surface, and we can control the resolution. And then you could convert that to polygons. I'm going to say Amin. How can we delete the constraints over time? Well, that's a good question, and that's why I've set it up in the dot network properly, so that hopefully I can show you something like that. So let's see what we can do here. I'm going to actually go with this fit. I'm going to output it as 2, and then I'm going to set the interpolation on these to B-spline, and hopefully that'll give me slightly smoother interpolation. I guess the tentacles aren't like super pointy at the ends. Like there's still a little bit of thickness there. Let's go let's see if we can get that looking a little better. All right. I mean, look, you could play around with this all day. This, I guess, you know, the polywire method gives you then the ability to potentially do some sculpting on top of this, because this is giving me polygons. You know, maybe I play with the resample values so that I can control that. I might be able to then go and do some traditional poly modeling on this, which, you know, potentially might look a little better. You know, I could take that result there and, you know, maybe just select that section, and then, whoa, that's interesting. Crazy selection. That's what I wanted, an edit node. And then, you know, I could pull that in. So like there's lots of options with this stuff, I guess. I use points. If I use points, I can use the soft radius to pull that stuff in. go and find the soft radius, and then it'll have a fall off on it, so you can kind of mess with that a little bit. The other potential thing that you could do on the Convert VDB version, oh, interesting, looks like that resample value is not good for the VDB version. So you can see, basically you get a sphere of volume around each point. So yeah, what you could do with this version, because this gives you a pretty dense mesh, once you convert it to polygons, you can see it's very dense. What you could do with that one is, potentially sculpt, put a sculpt node down, and then paint onto that. So, oops, try my brush shape. So you can see when I do that, it kind of gives me the ability to sculpt. So, perhaps what I could do, let's do middle mouse operation, deform points. You can see left mouse button is positive, middle mouse is negative. So that should give me the ability to kind of create a indentation. You also have like a fall off, I think. Soft edge. I don't know if you can make that any softer. You can blur this stuff as well. But yeah, you could kind of create some sort of indentation on here. I'm going to smooth this stuff out, so I'm not super concerned. But yeah, you could set it to smooth and then just smooth out some of that stuff. Houdini is not a sculpting tool, but it does have the ability to kind of do some things. And then, perhaps you could kind of try and do some suckers or something on there. I don't know. Looks a bit like something else. And then maybe then do like a deformation in the middle. I don't know. You could do stuff like that if you wanted to create like a sculpted tentacle in Houdini. Might be cool. The other thing you could play with is like doing some kind of scatter of points on the surface and using that to drive, something. It could be interesting, actually. Let's try that. I just want to do something kind of quick, but I do want it to kind of look half like an octopus tentacle. Let's scatter points on the surface, and we'll just do like a really sparse amount. And then your friend and mine, the attribute transfer, is going to give us a little radius around each point. So black, red, take that radius down. Hey, look at that. So give it a little bit of softness, a bit of fall off, even just all fall off. And what I'm going to do is just delete the points on one side. So I'm just going to do it manually for speed, but you might want to do it based on a bounds or something. And it's going to give me just, that classic sort of distribution of suckers on one side of the tentacle. And then using an attribute VOP, or you could do this in a wrangle, whatever. Basically, I'm going to take vector float, put color into the vector, and output the red channel, because that's all I have. Run that into a ramp, and I'm going to use this to displace along normal. So I'm going to put P and N here, output P. Don't really need to output N because the normals are kind of screwed when they come out. But I'm going to plug this into displacement amount, and you can see what happens first up. I'll make this a spline ramp again. Because this has fall off, because I just did blend width, it's all sort of values from 0 to kind of 1, or 1 to 0. And I can control this with a ramp now, so you can see, hey, look at that. When I displace, or, I could sort of go negative with the high value, so that's the most red up here, which would be the center, so that would be down. And then I can kind of create a little tentacle shape like that, and sort of play with that. So that, I mean, that looks pretty good. It's too big, but you know, you can see how I can control that shape and that sort of fall off that way. Even, you know, just round that stuff off. In here, what I might do is put a fit on that, and I could do like negative, you know, -1 or actually 0, -1. What do I want to do? Positive. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that just makes it harder. Maybe -0.5 to 0.5, so that this is kind of my black level here, so I can kind of have that come in a bit. It just means that basically, you know, I can create it so that center actually goes inside the object. So I can kind of play with it a little bit like that. It might mess up right at the top. You can see right at the top I've got this sort of, this wacky thing. So what you might want to do is kind of work out a way of scaling that transfer the further up it goes or something. I don't know. Probably what I'll do is just get rid of that top point, because that one's sort of out of place. Why I say you should do it not by deletion is now if I want to change this scatter, it's going to break this blast. It's just going to kind of go all kind of haywire. So, you know, ideally you might want to do that using some sort of procedural method, but you can see now I can increase the scale of those suckers, and you know, just it's a cool little procedural system. And then, you know, we could turn this into vellum or something, and we might do that at some point. What I'm gonna do is just give it a more interesting shape, because at the moment it's just like a Christmas tree. So maybe I'll just put a bend on it and change the axes. Capture origin, capture direction, capture length. Here we go. So that's interesting. What do I want to do? I want to rotate this around. I can never remember. Bend is one of those nodes. I just never remember how to get it to change which. Oh, there we go. Up vector. Hey, look at that. All right, so you know we've got something that we could kind of play with a little bit, animate if we wanted to. We could kind of. It's kind of funny. We could kind of just create a little animation with this where it's sort of. I don't know. Let's add a transform to it afterwards, and eventually I'll probably get somebody to animate this properly for me. But just for testing, it's fine to kind of do this stuff where you just sort of messing around and testing. I'll call this the R&D phase of the project, where I'm sort of just creating a little rough animation to prove that this is going to work. So maybe it sort of comes out like that, and then we'll sort of start animating our bend as well. So set that value. Maybe it sort of swings back like that as it comes out. It's sort of not quite working. So 0. Maybe it's a bit like that. And then it sort of slams down very quickly through the ship or something. 180. I don't know, let's try that, see what happens. Crazy technical. For testing, if we wanted to just quickly test to see how that might look, we could plug that into the collision geometry tab of the simple one. I don't even know if the position works, but let's just see what happens here. I'm going to turn off gravity for a second so that the boat doesn't move, and then we'll see if it works. Look at that, Daniel the animator. Yeah, look, I'm not the world's greatest animator. In fact, I pretty much suck at it, but you know, for simple kind of things thrown together, I can do some stuff. Testing, what do I want to do? What I'm going to do here, just to make this faster, and this is why it's good to have names sometimes, or groups even. I could say s@name equals, you know, star hull or something like that, and see if that, obviously that seems like it's failed, so maybe I didn't get that name right. S_name hull star is not a valid group. Well, let's see why that might be. Name, hey, there is a name called hull, but perhaps it doesn't like me doing it like that when it's packed or something. I don't know. Oh, doesn't matter. Whatever. Let's just let it go. See. Oh, so one thing I noticed then when I did that was the collision was not animated. It says create animated static objects. It needs to be deforming because I've animated this in SOPs using just deformation. It's a deforming static object. So let's see how that looks. Look, it's good, you know, even if you're not, you know, good at animation, it's good to kind of know a little bit about it and just know how to do simple stuff, because it really helps you kind of put all this stuff together and, you know, be able to do simple things. I'm the world's dodgiest animator. Like, I'll use bend nodes and all sorts of weird stuff which a rigger would just cringe at, but whatever, you know, it gets the job done. I remember, like, I worked on a cutscene or a trailer for Dragon Age a long time ago, and there was blood dripping off a severed head on a stick, and it was dripping onto a flower, and I rigged the flower with bend modifiers in 3D Studio Max, and every time the blood hit, I would do a little bend animation on it, and it was stupid, but it worked, you know, and everyone was like, oh man, what the hell are you doing? Why didn't you just rig that thing? I didn't know how, so, you know, you make it work. Alright, there we go. Pieces flying everywhere, so that is cool. Slice through the boat. So we've got no constraints in here, and obviously that is why it's just breaking apart so much. But, you know, in terms of just testing that kind of animation, it, you know, it works. It's a good little tool that I've, you know, just made to test this, and then finally when we get the proper animation of an octopus in there, or kraken, then, you know, it's gonna kind of, we know that it's going to work, so I'm going to call this out tentacle. And we'll go in here. This could be a static object. Merge that with my ground plane, and swap path out tentacle. Now we can check the collision, see what it looks like. Actually, it's bullet. Make sure you don't make the mistake of, you know, when you have a static object, the first tab is Ibd Solver. You can be fooled into thinking that that is what your collision shape might look like, but you need to make sure that you're looking at the bullet data tab if you're using bullet, because that's where it's going to show you that convex hull. And, you know, that's okay. At this point it looks fine, but what you'll notice if I disable the Ibd packed object and use deforming, what you'll notice as I play this is as this curves around, see how it strings across there? It stretches, you know, it's what I describe as shrink wrapping across. So that's actually what's going on with the collision, you know, it's slicing through like a knife instead of having this curvature. So, you know, the options that we have are to change the geometry representation. You could change it to concave, which will give you a perfect representation, but it's very slow. The best thing to do is to turn this into a series of convex hulls. So I'm going to, at this point here, actually, we need to do it kind of here. I'm going to first freeze this to create a rest frame, frame 1 here. So time shift it to frame 1. And then There are lots of ways of doing this, but I'd usually just use Voronoi fracture to break this up into a series of little Voronoi chunks, because Voronoi fracture does create pretty good convex holes, you know, with little concavity. So let's do that. 100 pieces, probably overkill. And in fact, we don't even need this for our collisions. So, you know, perhaps we'll preserve this side of things for our high-res model, you know, if we were to render this. This is overkill for our collisions. We don't need to see those suckers. So I'm going to turn this guy off. And I'm actually going to remesh this thing because it's super high res, which is going to slow down our simulation. So I'm going to set the target size to 1 for starters and just see what that gives me. That's actually, you know, not bad. Maybe a little higher. Alright. Then I'm going to apply these things and it should just kind of be the same. There we go. Freeze it, do our fracture, and then I'm going to use a point deform to deform these Voronoi fractured pieces by this object. So second input is rest, which is the non-moving one. Oops. And then the third input is the animated version. First input is the stuff you want to deform, which is the fracture. Then what we get is the fractures deforming. So you can see those fracture lines there. A little bit hard to see. Let me turn this on. So you can see those fractured pieces deforming now. You don't want to fracture on an animated geometry because the fracture will change every frame, and that's slow, also problematic. So now, when we look at our display geometry and set it to convex hull, nothing works, and maybe the reason for that is... what is the reason for that? Let me just reset to make sure that that's not the reason. It's probably... oh. It's that I didn't have the display on. Okay, so now you can see it's set to convex. But it's still doing that. We've got to turn this one on. Create convex hull per set of connected primitives. Go back to frame 1. Changes to collision objects don't happen if you do it after the first frame. So make sure you're always on the first frame, or check, go back to the first frame. And now you can see, perfect collision. No stringing, and we're still using, or no stretching, and we're still using convex hull. So that's good. Turn that off. It's nice and fast. Let's turn gravity off again. And I'm doing that just so it doesn't fall before this collision happens. And it should be pretty quick because the glue actually sort of deactivates stuff a little bit, which means that it's going to solve a lot faster. Alright, so the tentacle hits it when it first comes through the water, and then kablamo, you know, smashes its way through. Which is pretty cool. Yeah, looks kind of cool. I mean, we got to imagine that this thing's on water though, so we kind of don't want it to kind of completely flip over or fly off into, you know, into the air. Now here's where I'm going to ditch this gravity, and I'm going to put a pop force down. Because this will allow me to create custom kind of gravity conditions. And what you can do as a kind of activation thing is basically, you know, turn on Vex and do -9.8 up here in the force. And then put an if statement down. Say if at speed is less than or equal to 0, let's say, we're going to do force.y equals 0. Otherwise, it's going to do the value that's in there, which is -9.8. What this is going to do is there's going to be gravity. If we turn off use Vex, this ship's going to fall. So you can see it falling there. But if we turn this on, you can see the ship is not falling. But what will happen is as soon as it starts moving, as soon as... actually, I used an attribute that doesn't exist. I need to do this properly. I don't know why I thought that would work. not enough coffee. Length, v at v. So that is essentially creating a speed attribute. You could do like speed or float speed equals length v at v, and then do if speed equals 0 or less than or equal to 0. But we'll do this. So length v at v. Basically what we're doing is measuring the speed of the velocity of those points of the ship, and if they're less than or equal to 0, we're going to give them no gravity. So let's see if that works. So what will happen is as soon as it starts moving, then it will start falling because the length of the velocities is greater than 0. And you can see now it's not floating up anymore, it's all coming down. And these pieces, even though they're flying off, they will start to, hit their apex and fall down. So you can see it's all kind of collapsing now, which is cool. Now, if we didn't have a ground plane in there, we could, see this thing kind of just falling down. It's on the water, so it's going to fall down and just sink slowly. So let's see that. Our mast here is just floating in space for some reason, and that's kind of, slight danger of this stuff, but I'm sure we can work it out. And there it goes. So, you can see it's kind of falling down now. It's falling down too quick. So another thing that we could do is another condition in here. We could say, I'll just do it as another if statement just to make it clear. If at p.y is less than 0, force.y equals -1. So this is going to be if the position of the ship is less than world 0, so it's below the ground plane position or the world 0, we're going to reduce that force down to -1 so that when it's below the water, let's say, it's not going to sink as much. But actually what I can see there is that it started to sink immediately for those parts that were below. So I also need it to meet this condition. So we need to say and. So now it has to be faster. Actually, it needs to be greater than 0 for this condition. So it's slightly different. So this one needs to be greater than 0 because we don't want that force to kick in until it is greater than 0. And it has to be below 0 in height as well. So hopefully we won't see it fall now, but we will see it start to fall as it, You can do all sorts of interesting buoyancy things like fake, it's meant to be on the water. So you can create all sorts of interesting buoyancy things with simulations like this. So for instance, if we wanted it to kind of look like it was floating on the surface of water, we could create a custom sort of force. Let's do, I'm just going to comment this one out for now, and we'll try and do something with a little wrangle. So I'm going to put a pop wrangle down, and you can use pops with RBDs because RBDs are essentially points with geometry attached to them. So you can use all the pop forces. So I'm going to create a little sort of distance measure here. So I'm going to say at dist equals at p, or v at p, minus 0. And what this is going to give me is a vector, or maybe I should call this like at direction, actually. V at p minus 0. What this is going to give me is a direction from the position of the ship to world 0. So if I create a marker for that, call it dir, and we want it to be a vector. markers, like markers and packed geometry sometimes don't really work too well. Ah, there we go, that's interesting. What I'm going to do actually is make that a vector, so 0, 0, 0. That might hopefully work on perhaps... Ah, there we go. So you can see that I've got this radial kind of vector now from world 0 outwards. If I swap these around, 0 minus v at p, it will point the other way. So you can see now all of the points on the ship are pointing towards world 0. The further away they are, the longer that that vector is, the magnitude of that vector. So we've got a direction now to world 0. Now we can also calculate a distance. So at dist equals, I'll make that a float, f at dist equals distance is an expression you can use from v at p to 0. And that, if you have a look, now it's a little bit tricky to look at the geometry spreadsheet in here, but you just need to go to the packed object and find the geometry sort of tab. And then we can hide all and find dist. And this now is the distance between those various pieces and that world 0 position. Now, it's a little bit challenging, I guess, because, you know, some pieces are far away from it and other pieces, you know, kind of aren't. I feel like maybe what we should do is set up a centroid for this whole ship to begin with, so that we kind of have like a center or a position that we want this ship to kind of maintain as if it was floating on the surface. Have merged. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I must have hit, thanks. I must have hit like paste in here, and it pasted it over my webcam. Weird. Thanks for letting me know. It's bizarre. That's a new one. So, yeah, what I want to do is create an attribute here, and I'm just going to set it manually, but you could do it based on a centroid or something. So I'm just going to say v at centroid equals, and I'm just going to choose a kind of position here, because, you know, this thing's built on world 0. Here's our world 0. Here's 2, 1. I'm just going to say, like, 0.5. So v at centroid equals 0, 0.5, 0. And that's going to be like where I want the ship to sort of float around at. Now we go back to our top. Now, can we have an ocean spectrum and extract an animated centroid and apply the animation to the ship? Yes, of course, you could. And that might be something that I look at doing once I've kind of built the basic stuff and created this little floating thing. I could then utilize the spectrum to do that as well. But this, you know, this stuff is handy. So now perhaps what I can do is create a direction from, instead of from V at P, which is all of the pieces, so, you know, we've got the mast pointing really long, let's do it just based on the centroid that is stored now on that object. We should see that if we go back to frame 1, maybe. This is I mean, we could probably figure it out that that's just going to be a very small direction there from 0 to that centroid that we created. Oh, you know what? I need to transfer that to the pack geometry, or do it here. So if you do it before you pack, you need to make sure that you transfer it, or you could do it after you pack and then, you know, it's on top, but you always need to make sure that it's on the actual pack geometry. So now we should hopefully see that vector on the second frame. There we go. Kind of doesn't look like it's working. Minus 0, 0, 0. Looks like it's all kind of pointing downwards. Doesn't really look like it's... Oh, you can see actually Like, what's happening? I guess, yeah, that kind of makes sense, because I haven't actually... Interesting. What you can see is that we've got vectors pointing... Oh, I thought they were all pointing up and down, like down when they were below it, but it actually looks like they're just all pointing upwards. That's not really working. The distance here, what we can do is say the distance between 0 and at centroid, and that hopefully will be much smaller. Why is that? Why is that not working? You know what? I think it's... Let's define center. So we'll say center. Oops. Vector center equals 0, 0, 0. Then we'll put that in there. So this now should be the distance between world 0 and this centroid value. We can check that. At the moment, it's just kind of 0, but hopefully it will change as the ship moves. I don't know. I haven't done this in a while. Like I set this up on something, a ship that I did, which you might have seen, where it was floating in a flip simulation. And I did this kind of stuff, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm getting it kind of a little bit mixed up. Let's see if it's changing. I feel like it's I've done something wrong there. Oh look, yeah. I don't know. Maybe I won't worry about that for now. I'll try and figure that one out later. Sometimes, you know, sometimes things don't go to plan. You just gotta keep pushing on. But yeah, look, I mean, absolutely you could utilize the ocean spectrum to kind of, you know, do that stuff. Let's keep going with the setup for the destruction, and then, you know, maybe we're going to run out of time today, but maybe next week we can add the ocean stuff in and get the floating going properly. The next constraint that I want to put in is, you know, glue's okay for holding it together, but it's not going to give us a kind of really cool look. Let's do now adjacent pieces from points. And this is going to give us connections between, instead of the centroid, which the glue constraint gives us, this one's going to give us connections between the edges of all the geometry. So, you know, where the fractured edge of one piece connects to the other fractured edge of another piece. And this is good for soft constraints and bending and all that kind of stuff. Let's put down another wrangle. And we're going to do... Actually, I'll just copy this same wrangle. There's no need to keep typing it out. And all is fine. I'm going to call this one soft. And null. Let's do out soft con. And then we'll just duplicate, actually just duplicate this one. Yeah, out soft. And then we're going to put a soft constraint relationship down. Soft attach. Not that one. Bullet. Soft. We can see it, that's good, it means it's working. I gave it the same name that the default one is, so that should just pick that up automatically. And yeah, let's see. Oh, the other thing that you need to make sure you turn on for soft constraints is rest length. Otherwise, they'll get a default rest length of 1, and that's 1 meter, which is massive. So the whole boat will explode if we do that, which is cool, but not what we want. Now, on the soft constraint relationship, you can see you have a rest length multiplier, so you can actually mess with that. You've got stiffness, so the higher you go with that value, the more sort of rigid they will be. If it's quite low, the stiffness, it'll be kind of floppy. But let's see what happens with this. The thing to remember with soft constraints that's different to glue, they don't automatically break. There's nothing in that 2-node setup there that tells them to break automatically. So you need to do that manually, and that's what Amin was asking about with the SOP solver, and that's kind of, yeah, you know, it's what you have to do when you're doing it this more manual .NET way. You need to break them yourself, because as you can see, they're just, the whole boat is kind of it's flexing and it's falling apart, but we can see all of those constraints are still there and it's kind of holding it together in a weird way. So you want to be able to break that stuff yourself. You can see actually we might need to up our constraints here for this thing because this is moving kind of quickly. So, but what you can see is that they're holding together so much that it's sort of ruining the collisions. So what I'm going to do there is go and put a SOP solver down. And in here, and I guess this is the good thing about the dot-based one, the SOP-based rigid body solver, is that it has some of this stuff built into it. So breaking thresholds, you can break already. It's all built in there, but you know, it's good to know how to do it manually. Inside the SOP solver, all the way on the right is relationship geometry, and if you can't, you can barely see those constraints there. Just turn on the points, you can see them all. This is our constraints. You can see it's got the constraint name type. As you solve with these, you will see constraint attributes get created. So as this stuff solves, actually it doesn't work when you're inside the SOP solver. Just hit play for a little bit, and you know, once that starts to move, then we'll jump back in and have a look at these. They don't actually move inside here. The constraints never move. They're always static at the first frame. So you can see now, I can see attributes called angle, distance, force, torque. And if we have a look at the spreadsheet, that's not the right spreadsheet. Let's have a look. Oh, here we go. Yeah, sorry. Angle, distance, force, rest length, torque. When we register a collision on these, the values start to populate. So you can see they're all 0, but around that time there, frame 12, is when that first hits. And you can see that they're starting to register values. So they're getting a huge force when they first get hit and knocked. And you can see they register angle values as well. So as they bend, that angle value gets printed out to tell you what angle that has rotated to. They also have torque, which is like the force at what it's rotating, and distance, which determines how much it's kind of stretched away from its original rest length. So you can use all those attributes in a wrangle, or even just in a blast node. You could just say in a blast at distance greater than so-and-so delete. But you can also do it in a wrangle. So you could say if at distance is greater than, I don't know, let's just pick a value, 0.005, remove prim. Now, these are primitive attributes, so we're working on primitives. We need to remove prim. And, you know, if you forget how these expressions go, you can always use the tooltip that pops up. Geo handle, first input, so we're going to use 0. Prim number, we're just going to do at prim, because that's going to be any primitive that satisfies this, or that is satisfied by this condition. And then and points, so we put 1 if we want to delete the points as well, which we do. So 0 for the first input, at ptnum, and then 1 for also delete points. And then finish that off and run that over primitives. Okay, and something happened. We lost some primitives, so 63,000 at this point. 60,000, so we deleted, you know, over 3,000 points. And you can see them disappear. Some of those are being removed. So let's go back to the first frame, get out of here, and we'll leave the collision guide on for this one. Collision guides are pretty slow to display, so they're good to turn off if you don't need them, but it'll be useful to see them disappearing while we're doing this SOP solver stuff. Hey, no worries. I'm glad you guys are getting stuff out of it. It's you know, it's always challenging doing this stuff on the fly like this, and as you see, sometimes I don't get it right all the time. But you know, it's fun. It's fun stuff to do. And in reality, you know, these things don't usually happen in 2 hours when I'm doing them for real. But it's sort of, you know, it's good fun to try and do it as quickly as possible. Now, the collision of this thing is still not going so well, and you can see that going straight through there. And I think the reason is, if you have a look at the animation of this guy, he's moving really far in one frame. So perhaps we need to add substeps. Let's just check our static object here. I don't have reevaluate sops to interpolate geometry on. I should turn that on, especially if I'm doing any kind of subframe stuff. I don't think I am on here. I do have substeps, but let's see if it changes. I think it'll be about the same. Coffee break. So whenever you've got collisions that are sort of moving really quickly like that, you either need to slow them down, but if slowing them down is not possible, then you need to potentially add extra substeps. You can see it didn't fix the problem. You can try adding substeps to the bullet solver, but when you're dealing with collisions, it's actually better to do substeps on the dot network, because that will apply substeps to any incoming geometry, whereas the substeps on the bullet solver tend to be just to do with the actual bullet objects. So you can try that. Let's see. I'm just going to check our tentacle animation, because this one, we want to make sure that it is actually properly interpolating in the subframes. So I'm going to come down here to my global animation options, and yeah, substeps interpolate the geometry with a trail sub. I mean, yeah, I don't think interpolating with trail will work. Well, what I'm doing here is I need to make sure that if I turn off integer frame values and step through, actually I need to make my step 0.1. I just want to check that it's doing that. If it wasn't interpolating properly in the subframes, it would not be moving when I'm on 31.1.2. It would step, you know, it would jump every integer. Whenever I hit every integer, it wouldn't be doing this nice smooth interpolation. So that's good. That's what we want to see. I mean, the simple thing for me at this point would be to just slow this down. So you have to be careful when you're using time shift. Always turn off integer frame values, and if you're using $F is the integer version of the frame number. If you want the float value, you need to do $FF. The simple thing for me would just be to slow this down, you know, divide it by 2 and have it, oops, not that, $FF divided by 2. We'll run that at half speed, you know, and then it will not move. It'll move, you know, half the distance each frame, and that might be enough. But let's say I didn't want to do that and I just want to run it at full speed. Then adding a second substep here will kind of, it will do that, you know, it'll add an extra time step into the simulation and mean that it is solving on that 31, 31.5 and 32 and not just 31 and 32. So yeah, already I think I can see that it's slightly better. Let's see if it works. So .NET substeps seem to be the best for when you have really fast moving colliders. That seems to be a good way to kind of get that collision working better. Let's check it out. It's changed the simulation a little bit, but that's okay. You can see still getting a little bit, but it's better than what it was. That's really tearing this ship up. So, you know, probably you can see those constraints getting deleted. See how they disappear, you know, almost immediately as that thing touches it. Probably what I want to do is just increase that value. So at the moment it's very low. Let's do greater than 0.01. You could also change what you're using to delete them by. So yeah, perhaps I'll just save this one and try a different one. And I'll do at angle. And we can check, you know, what that angle might have been. We need to let it run for a little bit first. And if you want to see it in this tree view, you basically need to go to Relationships, Constraint Network, find the one that you are using. Constraint Network again, you got to find this buried geometry here, and now we can see the angle. So I can see some are going greater than 1, and the values are not in degrees here, they're in radians, so, you know, 0.6, whatever that is, let's do radians to degrees, and 0.6, oops, is actually 34 degrees, so, you know, it's a fair distance. Oh, notice my camera froze again. That's the most annoying thing. Let's see if I can get it back. Hey, there we go. So, yeah, you got to remember that. You know, 0.6 is not 0.6 of a degree. It's actually quite a large amount. So you just got to think about that when you're choosing what angle value you want to delete based on. Google is great for, you know, conversion. So let's just choose, you know, 0.6 and see how they get removed. And I'm running out of time here, so I'm gonna have to wrap this up pretty quickly. But you know, I kind of thought we wouldn't get through a whole effect in 1 2-hour session. So we can finish this off or keep working on it next week and maybe the week after, depending on how complex we want to go with it. I think next week it would be cool to get the ocean stuff in there, whether it's going to be a flip sim for starters or whether it's just going to be a geometry ocean. It sort of, you know, it depends what you you know, how complex you want to be with it. I sort of err more on the side of doing the geometry stuff just for simplicity and achievability, because as soon as you introduce flip into the equation, it just becomes, you know, a long time waiting for simulations. But, you know, it also looks very cool, so you just gotta think about what, you know, what's important. I think it would probably be better if this didn't clip the ship when it first came in. So what I might do is just change the animation slightly. 0, -5. Let's try that. There we go. Then it won't kind of knock the ship over before it has done the destruction. I mean, this ship has been surprisingly easy to you know, to work with. You know, I haven't had to do a lot of fracturing to it. Because of the way it was modeled, you know, it's been modeled well with all the individual planks. It's very easy to kind of just get going with it, and you know, I didn't even really have to fracture a lot of stuff. I possibly didn't even really need to, you know, do the masts. They could have just stayed as they were and gone down, you know, with the ship as whole objects. Here's where you might want more of a connection, where you actually constrain the masts to the ship so that they, you know, these ones aren't for some reason. Maybe they're breaking those connections. But, you know, you kind of want them connected to the ship so they fall down with it. I think that, you know, that's sort of working a little better. The braking and the substeps still need work, but yeah, it's not too bad. What I want to see, I think, is like, you know, that classic 2 halves of the ship. And maybe I need to move my tentacle over so I can get more of a perfect sort of let's just put a transform down. A perfect sort of cut right down the middle might just be better if I shift this over to there. And then have the 2 halves kind of sink in to the middle. Might be cool. And then, you know, we'll need to do maybe some custom strength stuff for those constraints so that we can properly preserve those 2 sides of the ship. That might be something we can do next. Oh, this weird double tentacle here. It's probably going to shatter the mast. Nice. you can see how those constraints are hanging around a long time. So, you know, the angle stuff, it possibly is not the best, or maybe I've gone too high with that value, because you can see that we've got a very rubber looking mast here. You know, it's really bending and it's not breaking. So you do have to kind of watch and play around with, you know, those values. Maybe 0.2. I don't know what 0.2 is. That might be like over 10 degrees, but that might be better. You just have to kind of play with it until you get, you know, until you get the right values. Let's see. We want to see those ones just break. Still not, oh, maybe starting to snap. Yeah, looks like that value just needs to be a lot lower. You could also do both. I mean, you can do, you know, you can layer these up so that the distance, you know, can be greater than, I don't know, 0.1 and it will break, and then you could do the angle greater than, I don't know, let's do greater than 0.1. So, you know, you can just keep layering up those conditions to get, you know, exactly what you want to occur. The other thing you could do is just completely remove points in the center. So you could do it in here, or you could do it out when you created them, but you might want to keep them for a certain amount of time. But I could just, you know, I could just actually blast based on a group. So let's do, I'll do based on points, keeping bounding regions, bounding box. Actually, I guess I can leave it as primitives if I'm using just a bounding box. And then you could slice away a bunch of points in the center like this. Yeah, just something like that, so that there aren't actually any soft constraints in this center section. And then the tentacle will just slice right through. Let's do group 1, there we go. So you could kind of do that to reduce the amount of constraints in that area. Let's try that. How many polys? I don't know. I'll have a look in a sec when it's finished doing that. It's not super high, you know. You can see the amount there. It's, you know, it's not super dense model, which is good for this stuff as well. You know, there's not excess polygons in those wooden pieces. So you can see now how, you know, it sort of just slices right through that section. I think probably, you know, I didn't ever increase the stiffness of this, but, you know, 10 is probably too low, which is why it's looking a little flexy and a little too bendy. But, you know, potentially increasing that stiffness is going to give us a slightly better look. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a couple of 100,000 polygons, I think, but that's not, you know, not bad. And Houdini can handle that stuff. The larger, you know, the more polygons you have with RBDs, the slower it's going to be. So you do need to keep that in mind. Yeah, see how it's staying together a lot better now. It's just sort of feeling a little bit more like it's got nails holding it together instead of rubber bands. I think, you know, the other thing that we could potentially do to make this so it doesn't completely just fly away is, you know, maybe we deactivate certain sections of the boat until the slice through happens, and that might kind of, you know, that might kind of help as well, just to kind of hold maybe the two ends in position until the Kraken has sliced through it, and then we release them so that they can float, you know, float away or sink. And that, you know, that could just be something that you do on top of the assemble. And you could do it with a group as well. Group and bounding box. Let's just turn that off. It's going to be points and then bounding regions. Let's just create a little bounding box here. 10, 10 over time. Just try and finish this off a little bit, and then we'll wrap it up. So what am I going to do? I'm going to use that group to create the active. So I'll do attribute wrangle. First deactivate. So I at active equals 0. And then I'll use the group to set the value of 1. So group 1, I at active equals 1. And then you just need to check on your Ibd packed object. Actually, that should just work. It's set to creative active objects, but that value should override. So now the center should be active, but these pieces on the edges should be inactive. And occasionally when you do this, it can mess up the glue. If glue is glued from a static, like a non-active object to an active object, sometimes that can just freeze the whole thing, which is a bit kind of annoying. But you just need to sort of play with that. There we go. So you see how now the two ends are completely just staying where they are. They're not breaking, but we're just slicing through that center. Maybe that's a good way to sort of preserve, you know, preserve that boat in the center, or preserve those edges, and just focus on smashing up the center, and then, you know, then just trying to work out from there what we do next. You can see though, it's just, yeah, it's slicing through that collision shape, or that collision speed is just too great. So rather than just adding tons more substeps, I'm going to just slow this down, and so that I don't have to wait another 60 frames, I'm just going to create a little offset as well to offset forwards. So turn off integer frames, or FF plus 30. So then it will start kind of there. Going. Let's see if this is any better. Fast-moving colliders are always problematic in lots of simulation contexts. They're always troublesome. You can do things like slow the whole simulation down as well, like run the simulation at half speed, including the collisions, and then just speed the whole thing up afterwards. That can sometimes work too. As you can see, it's moving much slower now. It's a little bit better. Still not amazing, but it's a little bit better. So, you know, one of the issues that I'm seeing here is that I'm getting, maybe I still have some pieces that are too long across the side of the boat, and that might be part of the issue here, is that these pieces that it's trying to slice through are actually really, really long, and it's just kind of going through the whole piece rather than breaking it up in that point. So that might be something to look at. You know, it's just, have I broken this up enough? Maybe some of these long pieces actually do need to be split up more, because they're actually sort of preventing the boat from breaking, you know, completely in half. Looking at the collisions, you know, looking at the constraints, all that sort of stuff. It's you know, it's a process, and it's something that just needs constant kind of revision and you know, and changing the settings, changing the fractures. But now we've kind of got it set up, you know, it's sort of working. Now it needs just, you know, it needs that extra stuff, adding it to the ocean, getting that motion in there. Yeah, the motion could be something that you add underneath, or sorry, not underneath, on top, that is like an additional thing that you do after the simulation. Could be something that you can try. Marcus, maybe a guide sim for the fold. Yeah, absolutely. You know, maybe we could drive that fold via two animated boxes, and that definitely could be a way to go, for sure. Maybe we could try that next week. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, there's lots of work to do, but hopefully that has kind of given you good kind of insight into the prepping stage and some of the setup. But you know, there's lots of work that goes into these shots, and it just requires requires time. Unfortunately, you know, it's a long time. But I think this will be really cool. I might try and get some better tentacle animation for next week. I think that, you know, that could really help. But, you know, my little test tentacle did its job. And yeah, you know, we'll get this in a little scene. We'll get it on the ocean. You can imagine it. Well, I can picture it. Get a little ocean spectrum in there. Where's the ship? Need to merge that out. Get a little grid going. Little ocean evaluate, ocean spectrum. From there, we should be able to get a cool little ocean on there. There we go. Easy. So yeah, you know, you get that in there, then you do the flip element as well. Get the floating going on. I think it'll look pretty cool. You know, there's lots of potential for it. Hey, cool, Marcus. Glad you're able to catch me live. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna wrap it up, guys. Unfortunately, I have to go. I could do this stuff all day, but this is the end of the stream. Thanks for joining me. If you're interested in, you know, doing this stuff yourself, go and check out KitBash. You know, they got 50% off, so it's a good time to get some of these awesome sets for a much less price. But yeah, I've been Daniel Hourigan, head of effects at CG Spectrum. If you're interested in studying with us, please check out the website. We have a couple of Houdini effects courses, an introduction and an advanced course, and we have lots of other courses if you're interested in you know, in film, visual effects, games. So please take a look at the website, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. You'll be notified of the next stream, and I'm going to keep working on this next week. So please come and join me, and we'll try and have some more fun breaking this pirate ship up. Cool. Well, thanks for joining, Amin. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but you're all most welcome. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Ivan. See you guys. Have a good week. I'll see you next time.